The air is thick with whispers. Ancient kings, lost civilizations, and royal bloodlines that have been deliberately erased from the pages of history seem to call out across time. Imagine, for a moment, that the history you have been taught is only a fragment, an incomplete story meticulously curated to hide the deeper truths. There are tales of empires that vanished beneath the waves, of lineages whose memory was nearly extinguished, and of knowledge so potent that those who possessed it were both revered and feared. Tonight, we journey into one such story, a tale of Atlantis, the legendary civilization that supposedly sank beneath the ocean, and the Merovingians, a royal line whose roots may stretch back to those very lost shores. Atlantis, even the name carries weight, a resonance that lingers in the imagination. Plato described it in his dialogues as a civilization of extraordinary advancement, a society whose wealth, technology, and knowledge were unmatched. Yet, mainstream historians dismiss it as allegory, a moral tale, a fiction crafted to teach lessons about hubris and the dangers of pride. But there are those who ask, what if Plato was recounting history, not myth? What if Atlantis did exist? And what if some fragment of it survived, carried across the seas, into the hands of those who would quietly shape the course of human events? And then there is the Merovingian line, the enigmatic dynasty that ruled the Franks in early medieval Europe. Known as the long-haired kings, they were considered sacred, chosen by some unseen force, their blood said to carry a divine essence. The tales surrounding them are strange, sometimes contradictory, often overlooked in the shadow of Charlemagne and the Carolingians who followed. Some suggest the Merovingians were not just kings, they were custodians of hidden knowledge, a living bridge to a forgotten past. Could they, in fact, be descendants of a civilization lost to the seas, inheritors of wisdom that had survived millennia? Our story begins in these liminal spaces between myth and memory, history and secrecy. It is a journey that challenges the way we see the past, that questions the very foundations of recorded knowledge. Imagine libraries lost beneath waves, secret texts hidden in monasteries, and symbols carved into stone that speak of truths too dangerous for the uninitiated. Picture the corridors of power in Europe, where kings and queens may have been guided not merely by politics, but by knowledge inherited from a civilization the world thought it had forgotten. The evidence is scattered, fragmentary, and often dismissed. Yet if you pay close attention, if you allow the whispers of history to reach your ear, a pattern emerges. We see echoes of Atlantis not just in myth, but in architecture, in ancient maps, and in the allegorical stories preserved in sacred texts. We see the Merovingians not simply as rulers of a small kingdom, but as a living lineage tied to the mysterious currents of history that run deeper than most dare to imagine. And so we begin. The story we are about to tell is not one of simple facts, nor of neatly documented events. It is a tapestry woven from fragments, from whispers and hints, from artifacts and esoteric symbols. It is a narrative that moves slowly, deliberately, like the tides that once swallowed Atlantis itself. Along the way, you will be invited to consider questions that mainstream history leaves unanswered. Who really shaped early Europe? What knowledge was lost and why? And could the echoes of an ancient, sunken world still ripple through the corridors of power today? As the night deepens, let your mind wander to forgotten shores. Picture the glint of golden artifacts buried beneath sands, inscriptions written in languages that have no modern counterpart, and the long shadows of kings whose true story has been erased. This is a tale that has survived, not in textbooks, but in whispers, preserved by those who understood its value and concealed by those who feared it. And as we move forward, we will follow these whispers, tracing a path through mystery, legend, and the faint but undeniable footprints of a line that might just stretch back to Atlantis itself. This is a story of lost worlds and hidden kings. It is a journey into the shadows of history, where every revelation brings more questions, and every answer hints at something greater still. It is a story that invites you to see the past, not as a closed book, but as a living, breathing narrative that has been waiting for someone to listen. And tonight we listen. Atlantis. Even today, the name evokes mystery, wonder, and a subtle sense of longing. Plato's dialogues, written more than 2,000 years ago, remain our primary window into this fabled civilization. In Timaeus and Critias, he describes an island nation of immense wealth, technological marvels, and a society governed by wisdom and virtue. But the more we dig, the more questions emerge. Was Atlantis merely an allegory, a cautionary tale about hubris and the dangers of imperial ambition, as mainstream scholars insist? Or could it have been something far more tangible, a civilization whose memory survived long enough to leave traces in our history, waiting to be rediscovered? Plato tells us that Atlantis existed beyond the Pillars of Heracles, a location shrouded in mystery even in his own time. Its people were said to be technologically advanced, possessing engineering knowledge and tools that would seem miraculous by today's standards. Canals, bridges, palaces, and temples, he describes, were constructed with precision and grandeur. The island's capital city glittered with walls of precious metals, adorned with gardens, fountains, and statues. Every detail suggests a society that had achieved a rare balance of sophistication and power, a civilization capable of shaping the world around it. Yet, despite these vivid descriptions, no universally accepted archaeological evidence exists to confirm the city's reality. Skeptics dismiss Atlantis as allegorical, a narrative Plato employed to discuss morality, ethics, and the downfall of prideful nations. But anomalies persist. Traces of advanced engineering and unexpected artifacts scattered across the Mediterranean and beyond. Underwater ruins, unusually sophisticated megalithic structures, and strange geometrical layouts hint that a highly organized civilization might have existed long before classical antiquity. Could these be the remnants of Atlantis? Some theorists suggest that Atlantis was not limited to a single island, but represented a network of cities, a civilization whose influence reached far across the ancient world. Trade routes, cultural diffusion, and shared symbolism hint at the possibility that Atlanteans were not confined to myth. They may have left footprints in distant lands, carrying knowledge, traditions, and perhaps even bloodlines that would resurface centuries later in Europe. Maps, inscriptions, and certain mythological parallels offer tantalizing clues. The similarities between Atlantean descriptions and ancient European sacred sites suggest a lineage of ideas, if not people, that survive the cataclysm. It is the cataclysm that makes the story so compelling. Plato recounts a civilization swallowed by the sea, a society destroyed overnight by natural forces, leaving only legends and whispers behind. Earthquakes, floods, and rising seas may have erased the physical structures, but survivors, those who escaped the disaster, could have carried their knowledge and culture elsewhere. Some theories propose that these refugees sailed across the Mediterranean, settling in Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa, influencing early civilizations in ways historians rarely acknowledge. Could the seeds of future dynasties, secret knowledge, and even religious traditions have originated from the survivors of Atlantis? Archaeologists and historians have long debated locations, from the Mediterranean's Santorini and Crete to the Azores and beyond the Atlantic. Each site presents its own enigmas: underwater ruins, sunken cities, and submerged plains that align eerily with Plato's descriptions. Modern technology, sonar mapping, satellite imagery, and underwater excavation has revealed structures that defy conventional explanation. Could these be Atlantean remnants? Some believe the answers have been suppressed or ignored, perhaps because the implications would challenge the foundations of accepted history. Beyond the physical evidence, the story of Atlantis resonates in human consciousness. Myths, symbols, and legends across different cultures echo the narrative of a sunken kingdom, advanced beyond its time, destroyed by pride or disaster. In Egypt, Mesopotamia, and Europe, stories speak of great floods, lost cities, and knowledge carried by a select few. These parallels suggest that Atlantis might not be confined to Greek imagination. It could represent a shared memory of a real civilization, fragmented and scattered over centuries. And then there is the human element. Plato emphasizes that Atlanteans were more than just builders or warriors. They were philosophers, scholars, and visionaries. Their culture valued wisdom, harmony, and understanding of natural forces. If fragments of this knowledge survived, passed down secretly through generations, they could have profoundly shaped human history. Could the Merovingians, centuries later, have been custodians of such inherited wisdom? Could their mysterious aura, sacred rituals, and claims of divine blood be traced back to the survivors of Atlantis? This is where myth intersects with possibility. Atlantis is not just a story of a sunken city. It is a narrative about survival, adaptation, and the persistence of knowledge against impossible odds. It invites us to reconsider what we know about the past, to explore the hidden currents of history that mainstream scholarship often overlooks. What if the Atlanteans' greatest legacy was not gold or monuments, but a lineage of wisdom carefully preserved, passing from hand to hand, hidden in plain sight, until it emerged centuries later in the hearts of European dynasties? As we continue this journey, we will follow those threads. We will trace the whispers of a civilization that may have vanished from the surface of the earth, but never truly disappeared. We will consider evidence both tantalizing and controversial, piecing together a picture of a world lost to memory, but never forgotten. The story of Atlantis is not a closed chapter. It is a door, leading us toward truths that have remained hidden for millennia, waiting for those bold enough to follow the trail. The story of Atlantis does not end with the waves swallowing its towering palaces and golden temples. If the civilization truly existed, if the cataclysm was real, then there must have been survivors, those who escaped the violent upheaval, carrying with them the knowledge, traditions, and perhaps even the bloodlines of a world lost to the ocean. It is here, in the aftermath of catastrophe, that the threads of history begin to intertwine, hinting at connections that span continents and centuries, whispering of a migration whose echoes may still resonate in Europe today. Consider the sheer scale of the disaster. Plato described a sudden and devastating flood, earthquakes tearing through the land, waves crashing over cities that had stood for centuries. To survive such destruction, the Atlanteans would have needed not only skill and ingenuity, but also foresight and organization. Maritime technology, advanced navigation, and knowledge of currents and winds would have been crucial. They were described as a people of extraordinary intellect. It seems plausible that some of them could have taken to the seas, leaving behind the ruins of their once glorious homeland, seeking new lands where they might preserve their civilization in exile. Where might they have gone? Scholars and theorists alike speculate on a route that stretches from the submerged islands of the Atlantic to the shores of the Mediterranean. Some suggest that the survivors found refuge in regions that later became centers of civilization: Egypt, the Levant, and the fertile lands of Europe. Others argue for a more direct path to the European continent, particularly the areas that would eventually become France, Germany, and Italy. The timing, roughly aligned with the end of the last ice age and the shifting coastlines, suggests that these migrations were possible, even inevitable, as humans sought safety and stability in a rapidly changing world. There is tantalizing evidence that hints at Atlantean influence in early European societies. Ancient megalithic structures, from the stone circles of Brittany to the massive dolmens scattered across Iberia, exhibit engineering sophistication that rivals Plato's descriptions. The symmetry, scale, and precision of these constructions suggest knowledge passed down by people who understood geometry, astronomy, and architecture in ways that seem astonishing for their time. Could these be the work of Atlantean survivors, or at least inspired by those who carried the memory of such skills across generations? And it was not only architecture that may bear their mark. Myths, symbols, and motifs that appear across ancient Europe carry echoes of a shared origin. Flood myths, tales of a golden age, and sacred traditions that revere knowledge as divine inheritance could all be interpreted as cultural remnants of Atlantis. These motifs seem to surface in unexpected places, from the sacred rivers of Gaul to the oral traditions of Celtic tribes. It is as if fragments of a vanished civilization were woven into the very fabric of European culture, waiting for a time when their significance might be recognized. Yet perhaps the most intriguing possibility lies in the lineage of kings and rulers. Could the survivors of Atlantis have integrated themselves into early European societies, not merely as migrants, but as elites, guides, advisors, and eventually rulers whose blood carried the memory of a lost civilization? Some esoteric theories suggest that the Merovingian dynasty, the long-haired kings of the Franks, may trace their ancestry back to these Atlantean refugees. Known for their mysterious aura, sacred rituals, and claims of divine heritage, the Merovingians occupy a peculiar place in history. Their legitimacy was never solely political. It was spiritual, almost mystical. If the connection to Atlantis is more than coincidence, then the survival of their line might represent more than mere genealogy. It could be a continuation of knowledge, a living thread linking the present to a forgotten world. The notion of migration as survival is not merely theoretical. Across history, cultures have carried their knowledge, art, and traditions with them as they fled disaster. The Atlanteans, described as highly organized and intelligent, would have ensured that critical knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, and philosophy, was preserved. Monuments may have crumbled, but ideas are far more resilient. In exile, these survivors would have been careful to integrate subtly, embedding their wisdom into the societies they joined, influencing the rise of new civilizations without drawing undue attention. Their legacy could be hidden in plain sight, encoded in rituals, architecture, and symbols that seem ordinary to those who do not know the context. Even the possibility of selective suppression emerges in this narrative. As centuries passed, the memory of Atlantis may have been deliberately obscured. Rulers, scribes, and religious authorities might have erased references to the past to consolidate power, presenting Europe as a land of emergent civilizations rather than a repository of ancient knowledge. Yet some echoes survived. In secretive bloodlines, clandestine schools of learning, and oral traditions guarded jealously by those who understood the importance of continuity. The Atlanteans' greatest achievement, then, may not have been their technology or wealth, but the careful preservation of knowledge and influence carried across oceans and generations. This migration, if true, reframes our understanding of European history. It suggests that the roots of certain dynasties, their rituals, and even their aura of sacred authority might be traced not simply to tribal alliances or conquest, but to a far older, forgotten civilization. It transforms the Merovingians from enigmatic rulers into potential inheritors of a legacy that stretches back to a sunken continent. Each artifact, each relic, each strange architectural alignment becomes more than coincidence. It is a whisper from the past, hinting at a story that mainstream history has yet to fully recognize. As we follow these threads, we begin to see a world where survival is not just physical, but intellectual and spiritual. The Atlantean survivors may have vanished from the seas, but they did not vanish from history. Instead, they adapted, migrated, and subtly shaped the societies they joined. Their story, hidden in plain sight, offers a bridge between myth and reality, a path that leads from the cataclysmic destruction of a lost civilization to the rise of dynasties whose influence would resonate for centuries. It is this journey, the flight from destruction, the preservation of knowledge, and the subtle shaping of new worlds, that forms the foundation of our narrative. To understand the Merovingians, and to grasp the possibility that they are connected to Atlantis, we must first understand the courage, ingenuity, and persistence of those who survive the impossible. It is a story of migration, of adaptation, and of memory preserved against the tides of time. A story that carries whispers of Atlantis into the heart of Europe, where the echoes of ancient kings are waiting to be heard. The Merovingian line emerges from the mists of early European history as one of the most enigmatic dynasties the world has ever known. They were the rulers of the Franks, a people whose power would come to shape the map of medieval Europe. But the Merovingians were no ordinary kings. They were described as long-haired kings, a distinction that went far beyond fashion or tradition. It was a symbol of divine authority, a visible sign that they were chosen by forces beyond mere mortals. Their very existence seemed to straddle the line between history and myth, a bridge between the human and the transcendent. To understand the Merovingians, we must first consider the aura that surrounded them. Their long hair was not cut, even in times of battle or political upheaval, a symbol of sacred blood and royal privilege. In some accounts, the hair itself was believed to carry power, a living testament to the king's lineage. Legends suggest that the Merovingian kings were capable of extraordinary feats, strategic brilliance, prescient insight, and almost mystical ability to command loyalty. Their reigns were often marked by secrecy, and their genealogies, though partially recorded, are shrouded in mystery. For centuries, scholars have speculated that this dynasty was more than a ruling family. It was a custodian of something ancient, a living vessel for knowledge lost to the broader world. It is here that the connection to Atlantis begins to take shape. The Merovingians' aura of sacred authority, their claims of divine blood, and their mysterious rituals invite speculation that their lineage may extend far beyond the early medieval period. Could they be descendants of the Atlantean survivors who fled across the seas, carrying with them wisdom that the world would otherwise forget? The parallels are compelling. Just as the Atlanteans were described as a civilization of advanced knowledge and spiritual insight, the Merovingians appear to have inherited traditions and customs that set them apart from neighboring tribes. Their rule was not merely political. It was almost sacerdotal, with sacred rites, secret teachings, and a hidden order of knowledge passed from generation to generation. Their genealogy is particularly intriguing. While historical records show the Merovingians as a Frankish dynasty beginning in the 5th century, some esoteric sources suggest that their lineage reaches back far earlier, to an age long forgotten by conventional history. Certain texts, often dismissed as legend, imply that their bloodline carries the imprint of a civilization predating even recorded European history, a civilization that might very well have been Atlantis. The claim is audacious, yet when combined with archaeological anomalies, unusual rituals, and the mysterious longevity of their influence, it becomes impossible to dismiss entirely. The Merovingians' sacred role was reflected not only in their hair and lineage, but also in their relationship to relics and symbols. Some historians and esoteric scholars propose that the dynasty guarded treasures of profound significance, artifacts, codices, and talismans thought to be imbued with knowledge, or even supernatural power. These objects were not mere ornaments or symbols of status. They were keys to understanding a hidden legacy. Like the survivors of Atlantis, the Merovingians may have understood that knowledge is power and that some truths are too dangerous or too valuable to be revealed to the world at large. Moreover, the Merovingians' influence seems to extend beyond their immediate reign. Even after their political power waned, whispers of their authority lingered in European courts, religious institutions, and secret societies. Some suggest that their descendants integrated themselves quietly into other noble houses, preserving a lineage of knowledge and influence that continued unseen, like a river flowing beneath the surface of history. Could it be that the memory of Atlantis, carried silently through the ages, survived in these quiet, powerful currents, shaping Europe in ways that historians have only begun to glimpse? The mystery deepens when one considers the legends of the Merovingians' sacredness. Certain accounts speak of kings who were untouched by ordinary human weakness, rulers who embodied both spiritual and temporal power. Some tales even suggest miraculous abilities, from foresight to healing, aligning them with the archetype of an enlightened civilization. It is tempting to see these stories as myth, but within them may lie echoes of a reality that has been deliberately obscured, fragments of an ancient wisdom encoded in blood, ritual, and tradition. This is not merely speculation. Scholars of esoteric history have noted unusual patterns in the Merovingians' reign. Strategic marriages that secured alliances far beyond their immediate kingdom, rituals that mirror ancient mystery traditions, and symbols that reappear in context centuries later. These patterns hint at a deliberate preservation of knowledge and influence. Just as the survivors of Atlantis may have carried their culture and technology across oceans, the Merovingians may have carried a spiritual and intellectual heritage, embedding it within the structures of European society. The very notion that a royal line could maintain secrecy across generations challenges our understanding of history. It suggests a sophisticated system of inheritance, not only of land and title, but of wisdom, knowledge, and possibly even technology. The Merovingians' reign becomes more than a chapter in European history. It becomes a living testament to the endurance of human knowledge, a bridge between the ancient and the medieval, between myth and historical record. And so, as we look closely at the Merovingian line, we begin to see patterns that seem almost too deliberate to be coincidence. Sacred blood, unbroken traditions, and mysterious powers. All of these elements suggest a continuity that could plausibly trace back to the survivors of a lost civilization. Whether one believes Atlantis existed as Plato described it, or sees the story as allegory, the Merovingians occupy a space where myth and reality intersect. They are a living connection to a world that history claims is gone, a dynasty that embodies the possibility of survival, continuity, and hidden influence. In exploring the Merovingians, we are not merely uncovering the history of a medieval dynasty. We are opening a door into the possibility that the past, far older than recorded history, has not vanished but persists quietly, carried in the bloodlines, symbols, and traditions of those who survived when the world as we knew it collapsed. To follow their story is to trace the faint echoes of Atlantis itself, to walk the path of kings who may have been the guardians of knowledge lost to most of humanity, yet preserved for those who would one day seek it. The Merovingians were not just kings. They were guardians of knowledge that the wider world scarcely glimpsed. Beneath the layers of political power and dynastic intrigue lay a web of esoteric traditions, rituals, symbols, and teachings that were passed down quietly, carefully, from one generation to the next. These traditions were not intended for the masses. They were reserved for those who could comprehend their depth, who understood that knowledge carries responsibility, and that some truths are too potent to be revealed recklessly. To examine the Merovingians is to peer into a world where spirituality, wisdom, and governance were inseparable, where power was measured not only by armies and land, but by insight into the hidden forces of the universe. From the earliest accounts, it is clear that the Merovingians placed immense value on ritual. Their coronation ceremonies, for example, were far more than displays of pomp. They involved sacred oils, chants, and gestures that were believed to confer not merely authority, but spiritual legitimacy. The very act of ruling was intertwined with the sacred. Kingship was both a privilege and a duty to uphold cosmic balance. In a sense, the Merovingians were priest-kings, embodying a connection to realms beyond the ordinary, drawing upon knowledge that had been preserved across centuries, perhaps even millennia. Some scholars suggest that these esoteric practices were not unique to the Merovingians, but rather inherited from an older, forgotten civilization, possibly the survivors of Atlantis themselves. Consider the parallels. Atlantis, as described by Plato, was a civilization of wisdom, advanced technology, and spiritual insight. Its people were said to understand the natural world in ways that bordered on mastery, capable of harnessing forces that seem miraculous to us now. The Merovingians, centuries later, exhibited rituals and symbols that echo this tradition. Sacred geometry, symbolic numerology, and ceremonial practices suggest a continuity of thought, a lineage of knowledge that survived the fall of one world only to be reborn in another. The secrecy surrounding these traditions is itself remarkable. Much of what we know comes from fragmented manuscripts, esoteric commentaries, and cryptic references in later medieval texts. Monastic scribes, often the sole recorders of knowledge in the early Middle Ages, were both guardians and gatekeepers, recording what was necessary while obscuring the most profound truths. Certain symbols, triangles, circles, crosses, and interlacing patterns appear repeatedly in Merovingian contexts. To the untrained eye, they are merely decorative. To those initiated into esoteric knowledge, they are maps of cosmic order, keys to understanding the structure of the universe, and codes that link the dynasty to a much older hidden wisdom. Even their relationship with sacred relics carries hints of deeper understanding. The Merovingians were rumored to possess objects of extraordinary significance: cups, stones, and manuscripts. They were not just valuable, but repositories of knowledge. Some texts suggest that these relics contained encoded information about the natural world, governance, or spiritual law, carefully preserved from the time of Atlantis. Whether literal or symbolic, the idea that the Merovingians were custodians of such treasures reinforces the notion that their rule was guided by principles beyond politics, principles that drew upon a lineage of knowledge older than Europe itself. The rituals themselves were often designed to instill a sense of awe, to connect the king and his court with forces that transcended the mundane. Coronations, anointings, and secret assemblies were infused with symbolism meant to align the ruler with cosmic order. Certain ceremonies were intentionally shrouded in darkness or secrecy, performed at times and in locations believed to amplify spiritual resonance. Observers recorded glimpses, candles flickering in hidden chapels, sacred chants echoing through stone halls, kings adorned with garments embroidered with symbols whose meanings were known only to a select few. These were not mere theatrics. They were expressions of a worldview in which knowledge, power, and the sacred were inseparable. There is also evidence to suggest that the Merovingians maintained a network of initiated individuals, priests, scholars, and advisors, who were entrusted with preserving this wisdom. These custodians acted as teachers, intermediaries, and sometimes secret historians, ensuring that even when dynastic fortunes declined, the essence of the knowledge survived. In some accounts, the line of succession itself was sacred, chosen not only for political aptitude, but for spiritual capacity, the ability to comprehend and preserve teachings that have been inherited from unknown ancient sources. Yet, as with all hidden knowledge, the Merovingians' esoteric traditions were vulnerable. Over time, external pressures, the rise of the Carolingians, the consolidation of church authority, and the reshaping of Europe threatened to erase these customs. Some scholars argue that deliberate suppression occurred, motivated by fear of a lineage whose authority was not merely political but spiritual. Kings whose legitimacy derived from secret knowledge posed a challenge to centralized institutions that demanded control over the narrative of history and divine favor. And yet, fragments persisted. Rituals, symbols, and teachings embedded in art, architecture, and oral tradition, waiting for those capable of seeing beyond the surface. This persistence of hidden wisdom is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of the Merovingians. They were not content with simple rulership. They sought to maintain a connection to something far older, a memory of civilization lost to time and catastrophe. Through ritual, symbol, and secret guardianship, they preserved echoes of knowledge that might otherwise have vanished completely. In this sense, the Merovingians were less rulers of a kingdom than stewards of a legacy that may stretch back to Atlantis, and whose resonance can still be traced in the hidden currents of European history. To explore the Merovingians is, therefore, to enter a world where every detail carries significance, every ritual conveys meaning, and every symbol may hide a deeper truth. It is to recognize that history, as we commonly know it, is only a surface layer, and that beneath lies a complex web of knowledge, preserved, protected, and transmitted across generations. The dynasty's esoteric practices remind us that power is not merely temporal, that wisdom can outlast empires, and that some legacies are preserved not in stone or gold, but in understanding itself, an inheritance far richer and far more dangerous than any throne could ever confer. Across the centuries, whispers of forgotten knowledge often survive in the most unlikely forms. Artifacts, relics, and ancient maps are not merely historical curiosities. In some cases, they're the silent witnesses of civilizations that vanished, leaving behind clues to their existence. The Merovingians, it seems, were intimately connected to such objects, serving as custodians of treasures whose significance extended far beyond material value. Likewise, the survivors of Atlantis, if they indeed fled to Europe and the Mediterranean, may have brought with them objects that encoded the wisdom of a lost world. These physical remnants, carefully preserved and often hidden, form a bridge between myth and history, allowing us glimpses into knowledge deliberately obscured from the public eye. Some of the most intriguing artifacts attributed to the Merovingians or their possible Atlantean predecessors are simple at first glance: engraved stones, ceremonial vessels, and intricately crafted jewelry. Yet on closer inspection, these items often contain symbols, inscriptions, and geometric patterns that defy conventional explanation. Lines etched into stone walls, spirals, and interlocking shapes, or precious metals arranged in specific configurations may not merely be decorative. They may represent codified knowledge, mathematical principles, astronomical observations, or maps of sacred sites and ley lines. In this sense, the objects themselves become repositories of information, carefully encoded to protect them from those uninitiated into their meaning. Maps, in particular, have long fueled speculation about the survival of Atlantean knowledge. Some obscure medieval charts depict lands that do not correspond neatly with known geography, coastlines that suggest a world before catastrophic flooding, or islands now submerged beneath the ocean. Certain maps appear to preserve knowledge that was supposedly lost during the cataclysms of antiquity, aligning with myths of a sunken continent. Scholars, both conventional and esoteric, have noted uncanny correspondences between these depictions and descriptions of Atlantis. While skeptics dismiss them as imaginative reconstructions, others see evidence that these maps were transmitted across generations, safeguarded by those who understood their significance. The Merovingians themselves are said to have been closely associated with such treasures. Chronicles hint at relics kept in monasteries or secret chambers of royal palaces, objects imbued not only with spiritual significance, but with encoded knowledge. Some manuscripts describe cups, stones, and even ceremonial blades whose craftsmanship and markings are unlike anything else of their time. Legends suggest these items contained more than artistry. They were vessels for memory, capable of preserving knowledge that might otherwise be lost. The idea is extraordinary, yet aligns with the broader pattern we have observed. A dynasty invested not merely in temporal rule, but in safeguarding a legacy that could survive centuries. Consider, for example, the enigmatic object known in esoteric circles as the vase of the long-haired kings. While its physical existence is debated, accounts describe it as a vessel adorned with intricate patterns, precious metals, and cryptic symbols. Some scholars interpret these symbols as a form of writing, encoding knowledge about the cosmos, sacred geometry, or even lost technologies. Others suggest it may have served as a ceremonial tool, connecting the Merovingians to ancestral wisdom, possibly even to the knowledge carried from a vanished Atlantis. Whether literal or allegorical, the artifact represents the principle that physical objects were not merely decorative or functional. They were carriers of hidden truths, tangible manifestations of esoteric understanding. In addition to artifacts, inscriptions and engravings offer tantalizing hints of hidden knowledge. Across Europe, from ancient churches to isolated crypts, cryptic symbols appear repeatedly. Triangles, circles, intertwine patterns, and star-like configurations. While some are dismissed as artistic flourishes, others suggest a continuity of understanding, a secret language preserved by those in the know. Could these markings represent maps of sacred sites, alignments with celestial bodies, or coded instructions for rituals? The consistency and recurrence of such symbols over centuries suggest deliberate transmission, a hidden network of information passed along through generations, protected from those who might misuse it or fail to understand its significance. Even the materials used in these artifacts may carry meaning. Precious metals such as gold, silver, and electrum were not merely chosen for value. They were selected for their symbolic resonance, their connection to natural forces, and their durability across time. Some theorists suggest that Atlanteans, or those who inherited their knowledge, understood the energetic properties of materials, embedding them intentionally in objects to serve as conduits of memory and power. When the Merovingians assumed guardianship of these treasures, they may have recognized their significance, using them in rituals as symbols of authority or as practical tools for preserving and transmitting knowledge. The interplay between artifacts and maps also hints at a broader system of hidden guidance. Just as the Atlanteans may have navigated oceans and established colonies with precise knowledge of currents, geography, and celestial positioning, these objects and charts may have served as navigational aids, encoding routes, resources, and sacred sites. The combination of physical artifact, symbolic language, and map-based guidance forms a sophisticated system of preservation, one that ensures critical knowledge survives cataclysms, wars, and political upheaval. It is a method of memory, a way of embedding history in tangible objects that can endure beyond the limits of human recall. Perhaps most fascinating is the tension between discovery and suppression. Throughout history, numerous artifacts and maps associated with Atlantean survivors or the Merovingians have been ignored, lost, or deliberately hidden. Religious authorities, political leaders, and scholars may have recognized the power inherent in such objects, choosing to obscure them from public view. And yet, fragments persist, appearing in unexpected places: monasteries, private collections, forgotten vaults. Each discovery sparks fascination, speculation, and sometimes controversy, reinforcing the notion that these relics carry a significance far greater than the casual observer might imagine. In the end, the artifacts and maps associated with Atlantis and the Merovingians are more than mere curiosities. They're the silent witnesses of civilizations that have been erased from mainstream history, vessels for knowledge that has survived against the odds. They challenge our assumptions, inviting us to consider that history is not only recorded in books and chronicles, but also embedded in objects carefully designed to endure, protect, and transmit wisdom. To follow their trail is to follow the whispers of the past, tracing a path through hidden chambers, cryptic symbols, and maps that hint at a world lost but not forgotten. A world whose secrets may still shape the present, if only we are willing to see them. Among the many mysteries surrounding the Merovingians, perhaps none is more compelling than their connection to the legends of the Holy Grail. The Grail has long captivated imaginations, depicted in countless tales as a cup of miraculous power, a vessel of divine significance, or even a symbol of sacred knowledge. But in the context of the Merovingians, the Grail is more than myth. It may represent a deeper truth, a tangible link between a sunken world and a line of kings whose blood carries the echoes of forgotten civilizations. To explore the Grail is to explore the idea of sacred bloodlines, of knowledge past in secret, and of a heritage carefully protected through centuries of turmoil. Stories of the Grail often focus on quests, knights, and spiritual enlightenment. Yet beneath these narratives lies the suggestion that the Grail is not merely a physical object, but a symbol of continuity, of a lineage preserved through time. In some esoteric traditions, the Grail is described not as a cup, but as a repository of divine blood, an inheritance carried by the Merovingians themselves. The idea is startling, that a royal bloodline could serve as a living vessel of wisdom, sanctity, and power, transmitting knowledge across generations in a form that eludes historical records and conventional understanding. The link between the Merovingians and the Grail is woven into medieval chronicles, oral traditions, and later literary works. Some sources suggest that the dynasty's long-haired kings were believed to possess a unique sanctity, a direct connection to divine or cosmic forces. Their blood, it was said, was imbued with qualities that set them apart, a mark of sacredness that legitimized their rule. This concept parallels the idea of the Grail as a vessel of divine essence, suggesting that the kings themselves may have embodied the Grail, carrying within them the continuity of a higher wisdom inherited from an older civilization, perhaps even the survivors of Atlantis. The symbolism is reinforced by ritual and ceremony. In coronations, sacred oils, and other rites, the Merovingians were often depicted in ways that emphasize the sanctity of their bloodline. Long hair, ceremonial garments, and the handling of sacred objects all served as visual cues of their unique status. These practices may have been remnants of an older tradition, transmitted across centuries, encoded in ways designed to preserve knowledge without revealing its full depth to outsiders. If Atlantis represented a civilization of advanced spiritual and technological understanding, then the Merovingians' rituals could be interpreted as a continuation of that wisdom, adapted to a new world and a new context. Some researchers also draw connections between the Grail legends and geography. Many of the supposed Grail locations correspond to regions historically associated with the Merovingians or sites where ancient knowledge might have been preserved. Sacred rivers, hidden valleys, and remote churches become more than mere scenery. They serve as markers, repositories, and symbols of a continuity that stretches back to a forgotten past. In this light, the Grail is not simply a destination for a quest, but a living network of knowledge, a spiritual map linking people, places, and memory across time. Artifacts associated with the Merovingians further reinforce this connection. Chalices, engraved relics, and mysterious objects preserved in monasteries or private collections have been interpreted by some scholars as embodiments of the Grail's symbolic power. Patterns etched into metal, inscriptions in ancient scripts, and hidden codes within decorative motifs suggest that these objects were designed not only for ritual, but also to convey information. In a sense, the Grail was not a single object, but a system, a combination of lineage, knowledge, and artifact that ensured the survival of wisdom through generations. The idea of sacred bloodlines also intersects with a broader theme of inheritance from Atlantis. If survivors of a sunken civilization carried knowledge to Europe, they may have integrated it into a select lineage, ensuring its preservation through careful selection, ritual, and secrecy. The Merovingians, with their mystical aura, sacred rituals, and emphasis on unbroken lineage, fit this pattern. Their blood may have symbolically, and perhaps literally, embodied the continuity of a lost civilization, linking them to wisdom that was older than recorded history. This connection between the Grail, sacred bloodlines, and the Merovingians challenges conventional notions of history. Mainstream records focus on political events, wars, and dynastic succession, leaving little room for spiritual or esoteric knowledge. Yet the recurring motifs, ritual practices, and legends suggest an alternative narrative, one in which the continuity of wisdom was as important, if not more important, than the accumulation of power or territory. The Grail, then, becomes a symbol of this hidden history, a marker of survival, and a testament to the enduring influence of a line that may trace back to Atlantis. Furthermore, the Grail legends emphasize secrecy and protection. Those who possessed it, or the knowledge it represents, were often bound by oath and ritual, tasked with guarding it from misuse. This mirrors what we know of the Merovingians and their esoteric practices. Sacred objects, secret rites, and the careful cultivation of lineage all suggest a deliberate strategy to preserve knowledge against the tides of history. In this sense, the Grail is not just a relic of legend. It is an emblem of stewardship, a signal that certain truths were deemed too valuable to risk exposure, and that the Merovingians may have been the chosen guardians. Ultimately, the Grail is a symbol of continuity, a bridge connecting a lost civilization with the dynasties that followed. It represents the survival of knowledge, the sanctity of bloodlines, and the delicate balance between secrecy and revelation. Whether one interprets it literally or metaphorically, the Grail provides a lens through which to view the Merovingians not merely as rulers, but as custodians of a heritage that defies conventional history. Through their blood, rituals, and artifacts, they preserved echoes of a civilization long vanished beneath the waves, ensuring that some fragment of its wisdom endured through the ages. In exploring the Grail and the sacred bloodlines, we begin to understand that history is not always written in plain sight. Sometimes it is hidden in lineage, encoded in objects, and whispered through ritual. The Merovingians' connection to the Grail is a reminder that the past is layered, that civilizations lost to memory can survive in unexpected ways, and that the echoes of Atlantis may yet be traced in the hidden sanctuaries of European history. History, as it is commonly presented, is often a carefully curated story. The grand narrative of empires, kings, and battles obscures countless truths, suppressed either intentionally or through neglect. When it comes to the Merovingians and the echoes of Atlantis, there are compelling indications that history itself may have been rewritten, edited, or erased to conceal knowledge that was deemed too dangerous, too revolutionary, or too destabilizing for the general population. The question arises, who would have had the motivation, the means, and the desire to erase entire legacies from collective memory, and why? From the early Middle Ages onward, the Merovingians occupied a position that was almost paradoxical. On one hand, they were legitimate rulers with political authority over the Franks. On the other, their rule was steeped in sacred tradition, lineage, and esoteric knowledge. They were not merely kings. They were custodians of hidden wisdom. This combination of spiritual and temporal power posed a threat to emerging institutions, particularly the Catholic Church and rival dynasties. Authority, especially religious authority, often depends upon control of the narrative. A king whose legitimacy derived from secret knowledge or divine heritage could not easily be subordinated to a centralized ecclesiastical hierarchy. Suppressing the memory of the Merovingians, then, served both political and spiritual objectives. It minimized their influence while consolidating the authority of those in power. The suppression appears to have been deliberate and multifaceted. Chronicles were rewritten, genealogies altered, and key events recast to emphasize the rise of successor dynasties, particularly the Carolingians. Figures who may have had direct knowledge of the Merovingians' esoteric practices were marginalized, their contributions minimized or erased. Monasteries, the repositories of historical record, often recorded only what aligned with sanctioned narratives, while leaving out details that might reveal the deeper significance of sacred rituals, artifacts, and bloodlines. In this way, the story of a sacred lineage, possibly carrying the wisdom of Atlantis, was obscured, leaving only fragments and whispers for future generations to piece together. Yet suppression is rarely absolute. Clues remain in the form of cryptic manuscripts, enigmatic inscriptions, and oral traditions that survived in isolated regions. Scholars of esoteric history have identified patterns that suggest continuity. Symbols recurring across distant geographies, legends of divine kings appearing in multiple cultural contexts, and ritual practices that echo themes from Atlantis. These remnants point to a deliberate effort to preserve knowledge covertly, even as the broader public was led to believe that such wisdom had been lost. The tension between revelation and suppression is at the heart of this narrative, an ongoing struggle between those who would preserve knowledge and those who would conceal it. Secret societies, both medieval and modern, may have played a role in this preservation. Orders like the Knights Templar, the Rosicrucians, and other clandestine groups have long been linked, in legend and speculation, to the protection of hidden knowledge. Some suggest that these societies inherited custodial duties once held by the Merovingians, acting as guardians of a legacy that spans millennia. Through ritual, coded symbolism, and selective teaching, these groups ensured that knowledge survived, even when the public history recorded by the powerful seemed to erase it entirely. In this light, suppression and preservation are two sides of the same coin. For every erasure, there is a deliberate act of concealment to safeguard what is valuable. The reasons for suppression are both practical and psychological. Knowledge that connects powerful lineages to a lost civilization, or that implies the existence of technologies or wisdom beyond accepted understanding, is inherently destabilizing. It challenges the legitimacy of rulers, the foundations of institutions, and the accepted chronology of history. For the Church, asserting that divine authority flowed exclusively through sanctioned channels meant that any alternative lineage, especially one claiming sacred or Atlantean origins, could not be tolerated. For rival dynasties, the Merovingians' claim to sacred heritage threatened the consolidation of political power. Erasure, obfuscation, and the rewriting of chronicles became tools of survival and dominance. Yet the very act of suppression also hints at the magnitude of what was being hidden. When information is deliberately buried, it implies significance far beyond ordinary record-keeping. Objects disappear from archives, manuscripts are destroyed, and references are excised from public histories, not merely to protect secrets, but because the secrets themselves carry the potential to reshape perception. The whispers of Atlantis, the sacred bloodline of the Merovingians, and the knowledge they guarded were all considered dangerous in the wrong hands. Those who controlled history sought to ensure that this wisdom remained inaccessible to the uninitiated. Even today, the echoes of suppression linger. Historians, archaeologists, and scholars often approach anomalies with skepticism, dismissing evidence that challenges the mainstream narrative. Maps that depict vanished continents, artifacts that seem technologically advanced for their era, and genealogies that suggest hidden lineages are frequently marginalized. And yet, the very persistence of these anomalies suggests that the past is never entirely erased. Knowledge may be concealed, obscured, or misrepresented, but it endures in hidden texts, secret symbols, and oral traditions passed down through generations. This tension between concealment and survival forms the backbone of the story we are tracing. The Merovingians, as custodians of ancient wisdom, faced forces determined to erase them from memory. Atlantis, as a civilization whose knowledge was thought lost to the sea, survived only in fragments preserved by those who fled and those who followed. The suppression of history is, in a sense, a measure of its power. The more effort that was invested in concealing these truths, the more consequential they must have been. And yet, the resilience of memory, the survival of symbols, rituals, and relics, speaks to the enduring nature of knowledge that refuses to be forgotten. As we continue, it becomes clear that uncovering this hidden history requires more than casual investigation. It demands attention to detail, an openness to patterns overlooked by mainstream narratives, and a willingness to consider that what was erased may have been deliberately hidden for reasons we are only beginning to understand. The Merovingians, the survivors of Atlantis, and the artifacts, maps, and rituals they left behind form a lattice of secrets, some obscured, some preserved, and all waiting to be traced. The suppression of history is not the end of the story. It is part of it, a shadow against which the light of hidden knowledge can finally be glimpsed. Rennes-le-Château appears, at first glance, like any other quiet hilltop village in southern France. A handful of stone houses, a church, winding paths softened by centuries of footsteps, and the warm wind rolling off the Languedoc hills. Yet behind this peaceful exterior lies one of Europe's most enduring and perplexing mysteries. It is a place where history, rumor, and whispers of ancient bloodlines converge into a single labyrinth. For more than a century, seekers, scholars, treasure hunters, and esoteric investigators have been drawn here by a question that refuses to fade. What secret did this village guard so carefully, and why did its shadow reach across continents and centuries? The story begins in the late 19th century with a priest, Bernard-François Béranger-Saunière. When he arrived in Rennes-le-Château in 1885, he was a man of modest means, presiding over a poor parish with little prospect of change. Yet within a few short years, Saunière underwent an inexplicable transformation. The impoverished priest suddenly had access to enormous wealth. He restored the church of Mary Magdalene with lavish detail, built a tower, a villa, elaborate gardens, and commissioned artworks far beyond his known financial capacity. Old records, however, show no trace of an inheritance or benefactor. There was no official explanation for the fortune that had descended on him overnight. Locals whispered. Officials investigated. Rumors blossomed into legends, none more persistent than the idea that Saunière had discovered something in the church, something hidden for centuries. The story goes that during renovations, he uncovered a set of parchments sealed beneath a broken altar pillar. Some said they contained genealogies, others claimed coded messages or maps. Whatever the truth, these documents formed the backbone of theories that Rennes-le-Château held proof of a secret bloodline stretching back to the Merovingian kings. The parish church itself is a curiosity. The interior decorations Saunière commissioned are unlike any other small-town chapel in France. The Stations of the Cross depict unusual, almost cryptic imagery. Statues stand in positions that seem deliberately arranged as part of a larger symbolic pattern. Most famously, at the entrance is the statue of a demon supporting holy water, Asmodeus, a figure tied to treasure, temptation, and hidden knowledge. Scholars have long debated whether Saunier intentionally placed coded symbols in the church's layout, embedding the story of the secret he found. Beyond the walls of the church, the village terrain hides its own enigmas. Certain stone alignments appear to form geometric patterns when mapped. Researchers have claimed pentagonal formations, encoded distances, and alignments to ancient sites, though whether these patterns are intentional or the product of imaginative pattern seeking remains contested. Still, the persistence of these claims speaks to the sense that the land itself holds a language waiting to be read. As the legend grew, so did its scope. Some investigators began to link Saunier's secret to the survival of Dagobert II's bloodline, the very thread that vanished from recorded history after the fall of the Merovingians. A controversial idea emerged, that the village had once been a refuge or waypoint for those who carried this forbidden lineage. Templars, Cathars, and later secret societies, such as the alleged Priory of Chaon, were woven into the narrative. Though many of these connections are circumstantial or speculative, they form a tapestry that has captured imaginations for decades. Mary Magdalene, whose presence dominates Saunier's renovations, plays a central role in these esoteric interpretations. In traditional Christian history, her symbolism is complex. In mystical traditions, she is often reimagined as a bearer of secret knowledge. Some theories propose that her veneration in southern France hints at a suppressed legacy, one intertwined with early royalty and ancient wisdom. Rennes-le-Château, in this view, becomes more than a village. It becomes a cipher for a bloodline preserved across time. The mystery grew even deeper in the mid-20th century, when documents known as the Dossier's Secrets surfaced in Paris, connecting Rennes-le-Château to the Priory of Chaon and suggesting that Saunier's fortune came from safeguarding genealogical records of a sacred dynasty. Many aspects of these documents have been challenged or debunked, and yet they continue to fascinate researchers because, despite inconsistencies, they align with some of the older local traditions that predate their appearance. Rennes-le-Château's allure lies not in definitive answers, but in its atmosphere of layered mysteries. Every stone path, every carved symbol, every unexplained expenditure by Saunier seems like a clue in a puzzle that refuses to assemble neatly. The village acts as a mirror, reflecting whatever narrative a seeker brings, be it archaeology, spirituality, conspiracy, or hidden history. And yet, there's one thread that continually resurfaces in all interpretations: the idea that something ancient survived here, something older than the medieval world, older even than Rome. A whisper of a lineage that began before recorded history, tied to a civilization that disappeared beneath the waves of myth. Whether practical, symbolic, or entirely legendary, the belief that Rennes-le-Château guards a memory older than France itself is what keeps the village alive in the global imagination. In the stillness of its narrow streets and the quiet hum of its hills, the same question lingers. Did the priest uncover a treasure of gold and artifacts? Or was it something far more dangerous? A piece of forgotten history that had been hidden for centuries to protect a bloodline the world was never meant to know? Whatever Saunier found, whatever he carried to his grave, the echoes of that mystery continue to resonate. Rennes-le-Château remains a crossroads where official history falters and myth awakens. For decades, one name has hovered at the edges of the Rennes-le-Château mystery like a shadow, present, elusive, and powerful in its suggestion: the Priory of Chaon, a brotherhood said to have existed for nearly 1,000 years, guarding secrets that predate the Crusades, perhaps even predating the fall of Rome itself. In the public imagination, it is a society woven from contradictions, dismissed by some as myth, embraced by others as the keystone in Europe's hidden history. What makes the Priory so compelling is not merely the air of secrecy that surrounds it, but the claim at its core, the protection of a sacred bloodline stretching back to the Merovingian kings, and further still to the ruins of a forgotten age. The Priory of Chaon first entered modern awareness in the 1960s, when a set of documents surfaced in the Bibliothèque of Paris. Genealogies, maps, coded references, and lists of Grand Masters filled with historic names such as Leonardo da Vinci, Nicholas Flamel, and Isaac Newton. Among these documents were the so-called dossiers secrets, papers that tied the Priory to the survival of Dagobert II's bloodline, an assertion that directly contradicted accepted history. According to these papers, the Merovingian dynasty did not die with Dagobert's assassination. Rather, his lineage continued quietly through the centuries, preserved, hidden, and protected by the Priory. To many historians, the Priory of Chaon is nothing more than a fabrication, a modern invention wrapped in the garments of medieval mystique. The 1956 registration of an organization under the same name is often cited as evidence that the society has shallow roots, an attempt by a handful of individuals to retroactively create an ancient myth. Yet the dismissal is complicated by the deeper layers of legend and the persistent echoes of older traditions. The name Chaon itself is ancient, associated with both biblical imagery and esoteric geography, and appears in medieval texts long predating the modern registration. The idea of a secretive order protecting sacred knowledge is also far older than the 20th century. And so the question persists, did the 1950s group merely adopt an older name, or were they reviving something buried and forgotten? As investigators dug deeper, inconsistencies emerged, but so did patterns, delicate threads woven across time. The lists of Grand Masters, for example, may be disputable in their exactness, but the concept mirrors other known esoteric orders. Renaissance guilds, alchemical societies, and medieval brotherhoods all maintained hidden hierarchies and coded lineages of leadership. The Priory's alleged structure fits comfortably within these traditions. Even more intriguingly, certain symbols linked to the Priory, crosses, roses, geometric designs, appear in architectural carvings across Europe, including regions historically tied to Merovingian influence. What complicates matters further is the Priory's repeated association with Rennes-le-Château. Many researchers believe that Berenger Saunière, the enigmatic priest who found mysterious documents in the village church, may have stumbled upon materials connected to the Priory's archive, records they have been guarding for generations. If Saunière uncovered genealogies or encoded messages that proved the survival of a Merovingian lineage, the Priory would have had a vested interest in preserving or retrieving them. His sudden wealth, unexplained travels, and cryptic symbols in his restored church all lend themselves to interpretations that a larger, hidden organization was involved. But if the Priory of Chaon is real, what exactly is it protecting? The central claim is simple but far-reaching: the preservation of the royal bloodline descending from the first kings of France. Yet this story is only the outer layer of a deeper myth. Some accounts suggest that the Merovingians themselves descended from a much older line: kings, sages, and survivors who carried knowledge from an advanced civilization lost to time. The Priory, in this view, is not merely guarding biology, it is guarding memory, a thread of continuity stretching from Atlantis to medieval Europe, maintained quietly in the shadows while history pushed forward. Throughout Europe's past, there are unexplained flashes of preservation, moments where ancient knowledge, long thought extinguished, reappears suddenly and with startling clarity. The Priory is often placed at the center of these surges. The architectural precision of Gothic cathedrals, the astronomical alignments preserved in monastic records, the esoteric symbolism woven into Renaissance art. Some argue that all of these reflect a lineage of secret knowledge carried by societies like the Priory. Whether this is fact or imagination, the pattern is undeniable. Everywhere the Priory is said to have touched, symbols of hidden continuity appear. A more pragmatic interpretation suggests that the Priory functions not as a physical organization with membership lists and headquarters, but as an esoteric tradition, an idea carried forward across generations. In this sense, its true existence is found not in buildings or documents, but in the transmission of knowledge from master to student, from family to heir. Like the Druids, who left no written records yet shaped Celtic culture for centuries, the Priory may operate quietly, invisibly, influencing events at a distance. And yet, despite the secrecy, the Priory has left enough traces to spark debates that continue today. Researchers have uncovered strange links between the Priory's supposed symbolism and the landscape around Rennes-le-Château. Geometries formed by ancient churches, alignments tracing to sacred mountains, and inscriptions that seem intentionally ambiguous. Some are likely coincidences, but others suggest a deliberate network of meaning laid across the land. Critics argue that these patterns are simply the result of human tendency to find order where none exists. But believers counter with a different question. If these symbols are illusions, why do they appear with such consistency across centuries, cultures, and regions tied to the same bloodline? The Priory's greatest allure lies in its uncertainty. If it were proven false, interest might fade. If it were proven real, the mystery would become history. But in this in-between state, half truth, half shadow, it thrives. Its ambiguity invites contemplation, interpretation, and endless exploration. The idea that an ancient order has quietly shepherded the remnants of a lost royal line through war, upheaval, and the shifting tides of European power is compelling not because it is demonstrably true, but because it speaks to a deeper instinct. The belief that some knowledge, some legacy, is too important to be left to the mercy of time. Whether the Priory is guardian, mythmaker, or something in between, its presence in the story of Rennes-le-Château adds a layer of gravity that cannot be ignored. And in the quiet hills of southern France, beneath the surface of an unassuming village, the possibility lingers that the Priory's greatest secret still waits, hidden in symbols, guarded in silence, preserved for those who know how to see. Long before recorded history began, long before the rise of Greece or Egypt, humanity lived through an age now preserved only in fragments, traces carved into stone, echoes whispered through myth. Across cultures, legends speak of a great civilization that flourished in a distant past, advanced beyond measure, and then collapsed in a single cataclysmic moment. To the Greeks, it was Atlantis. To the Egyptians, it was Zep-Tepi the first time. To the Celts, it was a shining western land lost beneath the waves. Though the names differ, the outline is the same. A culture of knowledge, navigation, and power destroyed by disaster, leaving only scattered survivors to rebuild the world in the aftermath. In recent decades, a strange pattern has emerged in archaeology, one that suggests humanity experienced a sudden surge of development around the end of the last ice age. Seemingly from nowhere, monumental architecture, astronomical knowledge, and maritime capabilities appeared across the ancient world. Göbekli Tepe rose in Anatolia with carvings of animals long extinct. Early European megaliths aligned perfectly with solstices. Mysterious stone structures appeared on remote islands, all bearing signs of advanced design. For many researchers, these leaps are difficult to explain through slow, linear progression. They hint at a lost chapter, a forgotten people who carried their skills across continents. Into this puzzle, a provocative hypothesis emerges. that these survivors integrated with early tribes in Europe, including those who later became the ancestors of the Merovingian line. If Atlantis was not a single city of myth, but a larger maritime culture, its refugees may have traveled outward in all directions, settling where the land permitted, bringing with them fragments of their knowledge. The hypothesis suggests Europe was not merely a secondary stage in the story of civilization, but a refuge for a sophisticated diaspora. A curious thread connects this idea to the Merovingians. Legends surrounding their origins contain symbols that mirror Atlantean motifs. Kings born of the sea, sacred knowledge passed through blood, rulers bound to mystical forces that predate Christianity. Merovec, the dynasty's founder, was said to be conceived when his mother encountered a creature rising from the waters. An origin story that, though mythologized, seems to echo memories of a sea-born people. While mainstream historians treat this tale as symbolic, its resemblance to tales associated with ancient maritime cultures is difficult to ignore. Supporting this connection are several archaeological puzzles aligned with ancient France and surrounding regions. The megalithic complexes of Brittany, Karnak, Gavrinis, Lochmariacar are older than the pyramids and display precise orientations to celestial events. Their engineering and patterns suggest knowledge far beyond what is traditionally assigned to Neolithic communities. Some researchers argue these structures were the work of a culture with advanced navigational and astronomical understanding, not unlike the one described in the Platonic accounts of Atlantis. Then there are the outlier artifacts, objects found in Europe that do not fit comfortably within their chronological layers. Strange metals, anomalous tools, carvings of ships that appear thousands of years too early, and symbols matching those found on distant islands. While each individual anomaly could be dismissed as coincidence or misinterpretation, together they form a mosaic of possibility. A recurring hallmark of this Atlantean hypothesis is the idea of blood memory, the belief that certain lineages carry not only genetic traits but ancestral wisdom, a kind of inherited intuition guiding their role in history. Among esoteric traditions, it is believed that some families act as vessels for ancient knowledge encoded in both their stories and their DNA. The Merovingian kings, with their unexplained traditions, ritual long hair, and reputation for possessing second sight, are often cited as an example of such a lineage. Even the early Franks, who gave rise to the Merovingians, displayed cultural traits unusual among tribes of their time. Symbolic animals, geometric emblems, and burial rites reminiscent of older Mediterranean and Atlantic practices. Some anthropologists have noted that certain early Frankish rituals align more closely with Bronze Age seafarer cultures than with Germanic tradition. These faint echoes suggest that the Franks may have absorbed remnants of a much older heritage, one that reached them through intermarriage, migration, or survival of an elite lineage carrying ancient customs forward. Another element supporting this theory is the cataclysm itself. Geological evidence now points to a significant global disruption around 10,800 BC, sudden climate fluctuations, megafaunal extinctions, rising sea levels, and catastrophic flooding across coastal regions. If a civilization existed in the low-lying areas of the Atlantic, it would have been devastated. Survivors would have had no choice but to flee inland or toward higher ground. Europe, with its river systems and navigable coastlines, would have been a natural destination. Though such ideas remain speculative, the convergence of myth, archaeology, and genetic studies creates a compelling tapestry. Recent analyses of ancient European DNA suggest that multiple population waves arrived during prehistory, some with unexpected genetic markers that do not easily map onto known migration patterns. These groups appear abruptly, just as the mythical refugees of Atlantis are said to have appeared among early peoples. From this perspective, the Merovingians may represent more than a medieval dynasty. They could embody the last visible expression of a lineage whose roots extend into a forgotten past. The Atlantean hypothesis does not propose that the Merovingians consciously carried ancient knowledge, but that their heritage links them, symbolically, genetically, or spiritually, to a civilization that helped seed the early growth of Europe. This concept becomes even more intriguing when considering the preservation of certain symbols. Merovingian artifacts display motifs such as triskels, spirals, solar wheels, and aquatic creatures, images repeated across ancient Atlantic cultures. These designs appear in Brittany, Ireland, Portugal, the Canary Islands, and even in the rock art of prehistoric North Africa. Their persistence suggests a shared cultural memory that may have begun millennia earlier than recorded history allows. Seen in this light, the story of Atlantis is not the tale of one city destroyed, but the memory of an entire culture dispersed. And the Merovingians, with their mysterious origins and hints of an ancient inheritance, may represent one of the surviving threads of that world, a living link between the deep past and medieval Europe. Whether this connection is literal, mythic, or symbolic, the idea endures because it fills a gap in our understanding of how civilization developed. Modern archaeology continues to uncover anomalies that do not fit comfortably within established timelines. Myths dismissed for centuries now appear to contain fragments of historical truth. And as new discoveries emerge, the possibility grows that the Merovingians were not born merely from the soil of early France, but from the last light of a civilization long vanished beneath the sea. Across the lands once ruled by the Merovingians, a curious pattern begins to emerge, a pattern invisible to the casual traveler, but unmistakable to those who trace lines, symbols, and distances across ancient landscapes. When viewed through the eyes of historians alone, the Merovingian kingdom appears as a patchwork of early medieval territories. But when seen through the lens of esoteric geography, a different picture forms, a map of power that stretches beyond the politics of the 6th and 7th centuries, hinting at knowledge far older than the dynasty itself. It begins with the placement of sacred sites. The Merovingian world was dotted with churches, monasteries, standing stones, and early fortresses located with uncanny precision. Many of these sites align with older megalithic locations dating back thousands of years. When their coordinates are plotted, straight lines form, lines that run unnaturally true across hills, valleys, and rivers. Some intersect at key Merovingian strongholds. Others converge near places where legends speak of buried relics, ancient tombs, or vanished libraries. These alignments, often referred to as ley lines, have long been dismissed by Orthodox scholars, yet the mathematical consistency they display cannot be easily ignored. One of the most intriguing patterns appears in the region of the Loire Valley, where several Merovingian-era churches stand precisely on the same longitudinal axis as ancient dolmens and mysterious prehistoric mounds. From Chalon-sur-Saône to Tours, sacred sites create a grid that seems less like coincidence and more like the deliberate continuation of an older sacred system. This raises a provocative question. Were the Merovingians inheritors of ancient geographical knowledge preserved by oral tradition, or by an elite group entrusted with its secrets? Supporting this idea is a peculiar detail. Merovingian leaders were often associated with symbols of geometry and cosmology. Their seals bear spirals, interlocking patterns, and star-like motifs that echo the designs carved into Neolithic monuments. Their ruling centers frequently occupied hilltops chosen not for defense, but for sightlines to the solstices and equinoxes. Even the dynasty's early capitals, such as Soissons and Metz, sit on intersections of river systems that, when followed, lead directly to some of Europe's most ancient megalithic corridors. The deeper one looks, the more deliberate it seems. Another compelling clue lies in the distribution of relics tied to the dynasty. Many objects connected to Merovingian rulers, crosses, rings, weapons, and reliquaries, have been found at locations that mirror the path of solar events. Several appear aligned with sunrise positions on dates significant to ancient Celtic and pre-Celtic calendars. These placements hint that the Merovingians inherited a cosmological framework that dictated where important items should rest, either in life or in burial. One striking example occurs in the region of St. Dagobert, where a tomb attributed to the last independent Merovingian king lies along a line pointing directly to the rising sun on the winter solstice. Whether intentional or the product of ancient tradition, the alignment resonates with prehistoric burial customs that viewed the solstice as a gateway between worlds, a moment when ancestors could be honored and their legacy renewed. Then there is the peculiar geometry around the Rhine and Moselle rivers. When the shapes of Merovingian territorial divisions are superimposed onto a map containing the region's ancient Roman, Celtic, and prehistoric structures, the borders appear to follow not the practical contours of land or settlement, but something more symbolic. Some historians believe these shapes encode sacred geometry associated with the flower of life or vesica piscis patterns. The precision with which these geometric forms repeat across unrelated structures suggests they may not be accidental. The Merovingians also displayed a fascination with the number 7. Seven-pointed crowns and seven-rayed symbols appear frequently in artifacts and manuscripts. Interestingly, when sacred sites linked to the dynasty are connected on a modern map, clusters often arrange themselves into repeating seven-point star patterns. Such formations are nearly impossible to create unintentionally on a regional scale. Their occurrence hints at a guiding principle used by planners, builders, or religious figures with access to advanced surveying techniques. This raises another intriguing thread. How did early medieval rulers possess such sophisticated knowledge? Their era is often portrayed as a time of limited scientific understanding, lacking the mathematical and astronomical prowess of the classical world. Yet the Merovingians behaved like the heirs of a deeper inheritance, one that may have come not from Rome, but from the forgotten peoples who shaped Europe long before imperial armies marched across it. Support for this possibility lies in the mysterious survival of ancient measuring systems. Several Merovingian-era structures use lengths remarkably close to the megalithic yard, a prehistoric unit of measurement whose origin remains unknown but whose precision rivals modern standards. Its reappearance in Merovingian architecture is difficult to explain without assuming that someone within the dynasty or its priesthood preserved the knowledge of how to apply it. Esoteric traditions later claimed that the Merovingians held maps of the deep past, charts showing the energy flows beneath the Earth's surface, what some call dragon lines, telluric currents, or geomantic pathways. According to legend, these maps were kept in monastic libraries hidden within the forests and mountains of Gaul. While no physical map has been confirmed, medieval writings speak cryptically of the royal paths of wisdom, the lines beneath the kings, and the sleeping rivers of the world. Such language hints at a belief in invisible networks that shaped the land and guided the placement of sacred sites. Even more enigmatic is the presence of star alignments in Merovingian territories. Certain clusters of towns and abbeys appear arranged to mirror constellations, such as Orion, Cygnus, and the Pleiades. Scholars who study ancient astronomical traditions note that mirroring the heavens on Earth was a practice of several early civilizations. If the Merovingians replicated celestial patterns, they may have been preserving a fragment of knowledge handed down from a lost astronomical culture, perhaps the same people who constructed mysterious observatories in the distant past. Whether these alignments were created intentionally or absorbed unconsciously through tradition, the effect is the same. The Merovingian realm becomes a landscape of encoded memory, a territorial canvas painted with symbols from an unknown antiquity. It suggests that the dynasty's power did not rest solely on political authority or military strength. It rested on something more subtle, a connection to a geographical and cosmological network that stretched across Europe, linking the present to the deep past. In this sense, the Merovingian map of power may not represent a medieval design at all, but the last recognizable expression of an ancient system inherited from civilizations that left no written record, only monuments, symbols, and the faintest echoes of a forgotten science. Across the centuries that followed the supposed fall of the Merovingian kings, a strange silence settled over their legacy. It was not the natural fading of a dynasty whose time had passed, but something sharper, an erasure so swift and thorough that it raised more questions than it resolved. Their chronicles were reduced, their symbols obscured, their names pushed into the margins of medieval memory. And yet, quietly, beneath the surface of official history, rumors persisted. Whispers spoke of heirs who survived in secret, sheltered by loyal families or hidden by those who believed the bloodline carried a sacred significance. From these hushed traditions, the idea of a shadowed survival emerged. The belief that the Merovingian line did not vanish, but continued in subtle, fragmented ways through other houses of Europe. The faint traces of this survival appear like dusted fingerprints on old documents, entries that seem too deliberate to be accidental and too ambiguous to confirm directly. Medieval genealogies are notoriously tangled, yet certain lines seem almost intentionally convoluted, as if someone sought to bury connections within complexity. Some noble families of the Carolingian and post-Carolingian era, especially those in the regions of Metz, Lorraine, and Burgundy, display symbols later attributed to Merovingian heritage. Ancient seals bearing the same spirals, lilies, and triadic motifs begin appearing among families who, by official record, had no reason to employ them. Scholars have debated for generations whether these symbols represent imitation, coincidence, or concealed inheritance. One of the most intriguing theories centers around the idea of integration. Instead of vanishing, the Merovingian lineage may have been absorbed into other noble families, not erased but blended, with its blood coursing quietly through new branches. Medieval Europe was a labyrinth of alliances, marriages, and strategic unions. For a surviving line seeking protection, merging into another house would have been the safest path, especially if those tasked with preserving it believed the bloodline carried more than royal legitimacy, something esoteric, something ancient. The notion of hidden descendants gained traction with the appearance of several medieval chronicles hinting at the royal seed that fled into the mountains or the prince preserved by the faithful. Though the texts do not name the dynasty explicitly, the regions referenced correlate with areas historically loyal to the late Merovingian kings. In particular, the Vosges Mountains in southern Lorraine are repeatedly linked with legends of lost heirs. In some villages, local folklore tells of noble children protected by monks or knights, raised in secrecy, destined to return when the world was ready. Whether these stories arose from fact or imagination, they created a foundation that later scholars and esoteric thinkers would build upon. By the Renaissance, whispers of the old royal blood began circulating in cryptic manuscripts and private correspondence. Some alchemical texts alluded to a lineage that carried a spiritual spark or ancient wisdom, preserved for a time of renewal. These writings bear no explicit references to the Merovingians, yet the symbolism, serpents, stars, and sea-born kings, mirrors motifs associated with the dynasty's mythic origins. A curious continuation of these symbols appears in several European houses that rose to prominence during the medieval and early modern periods. The noble families of Luxembourg, Lusignan, Plantagenet, and certain branches of the Habsburgs all bear heraldic motifs that some researchers link to Merovingian roots. Though mainstream historians attribute these similarities to cultural diffusion or stylistic preference. The consistency is striking. Each of these houses had a reputation for ancient origins, often tied to legend or myth rather than documented lineage. It is within these ambiguous spaces that many believe the Merovingian bloodline slipped quietly into the fabric of European aristocracy. The Lusignan family, for instance, traced its origins to a mythical being, a fairy queen, whose marriage to a mortal king echoed the Merovingian story of a supernatural lineage descending into the human world. The Plantagenets of England carried symbols associated with ancient Gaul, even though their official ancestry led elsewhere. And several noble families in the Rhineland, regions once controlled by Merovingian rulers, continued to use the bee as a royal emblem centuries before Napoleon famously revived it. Bees were one of the earliest symbols associated with Merovingian kings, representing immortality, resurrection, and the divine right to rule. Their survival and unexpected heraldry hints at a lineage preserved through symbolism long after the dynasty's fall. Beyond heraldry, certain families maintained traditions that seemed out of step with their time. Rituals involving solstice nights, ancient burial mounds, or protective oaths passed down through generations. Some preserved stories of sea-born ancestors or kings who came from the far west, echoing the same mythic language tied to the earliest tales of Atlantis. Though these customs may appear folkloric, their persistence within aristocratic circles suggests a deeper, inherited significance. As Europe entered the Enlightenment era, interest in genealogy surged. Noble houses sought to validate their prestige through elaborate family trees. During this period, several genealogists made quiet, intriguing claims that certain lines contained ancient Gaulish blood or descended from the first kings of France. Most of these claims were dismissed as symbolic or rhetorical, but a few contained references to old documents now lost, suggesting a tradition of remembrance maintained among a select few. The 19th century brought renewed fascination. Secret societies, mystics, and esoteric scholars revived discussions of the Merovingian legacy. Some claimed that the bloodline carried a unique spiritual quality or encoded wisdom stretching back to pre-Christian ages. Others suggested it contained remnants of a forgotten civilization, Atlantis, Lemuria, or another lost world whose survivors seeded early Europe. For these groups, the survival of the Merovingian line represented more than genealogy. It symbolized continuity between ancient knowledge and modern times. By the 20th century, the idea of hidden Merovingian descendants became intertwined with broader theories of suppressed history and secret guardianship. Though some interpretations spiraled into speculation, they highlighted a deeper truth. The Merovingian dynasty had left an imprint on Europe far more enduring than its recorded reign. Whether through biological descent, symbolic inheritance, or cultural memory, something of the line persisted. Families scattered across the continent carried fragments, names, symbols, whispered tales, and rituals whose meanings had faded yet refused to disappear. These threads, when gathered together, form a tapestry suggesting survival not through thrones or armies, but through quiet endurance. The possibility remains that somewhere in Europe's vast network of noble houses, the blood once said to link kings to the sea and the stars still flows, unnoticed by history, but preserved through centuries of subtle protection. And if such a lineage exists, it may represent one of the last living echoes of a world far older than the records that define our past. In the shifting landscape of medieval Europe, as power changed hands and kingdoms rose and fell, a deeper current flowed beneath the visible political world, a whisper of guardianship, of quiet watchers who preserved something older than the crowns they served. These silent protectors appear not as clearly defined orders in the historical record, but as subtle patterns woven through monastic traditions, knightly brotherhoods, and noble households aligned with no single king, yet connected by shared symbols. As the centuries passed, some researchers began to suspect that these groups, scattered but persistent, acted as custodians of a secret inheritance tied to the ancient Merovingian line. Their mission, it seemed, was not merely political but spiritual, to protect a legacy believed to carry knowledge from ages long forgotten. Hints of these guardians surface in medieval writings that describe brothers of the hidden star, keepers of the sacred well, or the watchful court, phrases that appear too allegorical to be literal, yet too consistent to dismiss outright. Chroniclers often used metaphor when referencing things they feared to state plainly, especially in eras where accusations of heresy could silence even the most respected scholars. Within these poetic descriptions lies the suggestion of groups who operated in the shadows, preserving traditions that predated Christianity but had been absorbed and concealed within monastic life. Many monasteries founded between the 7th and 12th centuries show unusual reverence for early Frankish kings, particularly Clovis and the Merovingian saints. Their relics were preserved with a care that exceeded typical royal devotion. Some abbeys curated ancient manuscripts said to contain genealogies that diverged from official accounts, but these documents mysteriously disappeared over time, lost to fires, political transitions, or silent removal by unknown custodians. The repeated disappearance of records related to the Merovingian lineage has fed speculation that individuals or groups were actively protecting or concealing knowledge considered dangerous or transformative. Among the most intriguing of these suspected guardians are the monastic cells in the region of the Vosges Mountains. Remote, forested, and steeped in pre-Christian traditions, these communities maintained rituals centered on seasonal cycles, sacred springs, and star alignments, practices reminiscent of early Merovingian lore. Their abbots were often born from local noble families rumored to be descendants or distant relatives of the Frankish kings. Though their official roles were spiritual, their influence in regional governance and diplomacy suggests they held a form of quiet power, mediated through lineage and ancient customs rather than formal titles. The rise of knightly orders in the High Middle Ages introduced another layer of mystery. While well-known orders like the Templars, Hospitallers, and Teutonic Knights operated in the open, smaller regional brotherhoods possessed symbols eerily similar to Merovingian iconography. Bees, the 8-rayed star, the descending spiral, the stylized sea wave. These symbols appear carved into monastery walls, embroidered into tunics, and preserved in heraldic seals. Many of these orders disappeared without recorded reason, leaving behind little more than carved stone remnants and cryptic references in local histories. The Templars, of course, cast the longest shadow. Though mainstream history portrays them primarily as warrior monks and bankers, esoteric traditions claim they had an interest in early French royal bloodlines. The order's unusual protection of certain families in southern France, along with their reputed knowledge of ancient relics hidden beneath the Temple Mount, fueled theories that they viewed the Merovingians as possessing something sacred, something worth preserving. Though the Templars themselves were destroyed, fragments of their legacy survived in successor groups, some of which retained the same symbols associated with Merovingian myth. Another layer emerges in the form of noble households that maintained private archives, often containing genealogies and relics passed down through generations. These families appeared to act as quiet stewards of history rather than public champions of political claims. Their loyalty was rarely to reigning monarchs. Instead, they preserved documents and artifacts tied to the first kings of the region. Even in periods of turmoil, such as the 100 Years' War or the Reformation, these households maintained continuity in their traditions, suggesting that they guarded more than just family pride. Some later scholars proposed that they served as decentralized guardians of an ancient lineage, ensuring its memory could not be erased entirely. The Renaissance illuminated new connections. As interest in classical antiquity exploded, scholars revisited the origins of European dynasties. Some uncovered strange cross-references between early sources, pointing to lineages that intertwined with legends of sea kings, starborn rulers, or survivors from a drowned land, stories echoing Atlantis and other lost civilizations. At the same time, esoteric groups, such as Rosicrucians and Hermetic circles, began referring to a royal blood of the dawn, believed to be preserved through hidden channels. Though their writings use symbolic language, many see these references as veiled allusions to the Merovingian line. Even in the 17th and 18th centuries, royal courts across Europe exchanged whispered rumors about noble families whose heritage was older than kingdoms, touched by the ancient light, or bearing the mark of the sea. Such phrases, though poetic, reflect an underlying belief that certain bloodlines retained something primordial, an inheritance not measured by land or crown, but by spiritual significance. These murmurs intensified during periods of political upheaval, as though each era sensed an undercurrent shaping its fate from beneath the surface. By the 19th century, researchers began linking these guarded lineages to secret societies that emerged across Europe. Some theorists claimed that groups like the Priory of Chaon, or earlier prototypes of it, existed to safeguard descendants of the Merovingian kings until the time was right for them to reclaim their role. Whether these claims were fact, fiction, or a blend of both, they highlight a persistent belief in guardianship, that certain people or organizations operated quietly to ensure the survival of something deeply connected to Europe's distant past. Modern historians remain divided. Some argue that all of this is coincidence or later romantic invention. Others acknowledge that too many symbols, too many preserved traditions, and too many vanished documents align to ignore. Even if no formal organization existed, a pattern emerges of individuals and families acting in ways that suggest deliberate protection of a hidden heritage. What is clear is that the Merovingian legacy did not simply disappear. It survived in fragments, through symbols, rituals, guarded stories, and the silent actions of those who believed the lineage mattered. Not as a political force, but as a deeper thread woven into Europe's cultural and mystical memory. Somewhere in these shadows of guardianship and secrecy lies the possibility that the Merovingian line, once entwined with myths of Atlantis and ancient wisdom, remained alive through the guardians who protected its remnants. Whether they preserved a bloodline, a secret, or something far more mysterious remains the unanswered question. As Europe moved into the modern age, the quiet whispers of old bloodlines and hidden guardians began to echo against a new backdrop, one of revolutions, scientific awakenings, and the unraveling of monarchies that had once seemed eternal. Yet even as thrones toppled and republics rose, a strange phenomenon unfolded: the reappearance of ancient symbols long associated with forgotten dynasties. Bees, stars, spirals, and fleur-de-lis patterns resurfaced not as remnants of nostalgia, but as deliberate emblems adopted by emperors, secret societies, and political movements. These symbols hinted at a legacy that refused to die, surfacing at moments when Europe faced profound transformation. For some, these resurgences were coincidence. For others, they were signs that hidden currents were guiding history along a path shaped by forces older than the states they influenced. One of the most striking examples emerged during the age of Napoleon. When the French emperor chose his personal emblem, he bypassed the fleur-de-lis of the Bourbon kings and selected instead the golden bee, a symbol nearly dormant for over a millennium. Yet the bee had once been inseparable from the Merovingian kings, representing resurrection, continuity, and the divine favor bestowed upon ancient rulers. Napoleon claimed he chose the bee because it was industrious and immortal, but many scholars speculate whether he was influenced by advisors aware of the symbol's deeper significance. In adopting the bee, Napoleon aligned himself, consciously or not, with a legacy that predated the Carolingians and touched the earliest roots of French kingship. The bee was only the beginning. Throughout the 19th century, several European heraldic revivals incorporated symbols that mirrored Merovingian motifs. Architects embedded them in cathedral restorations. Antiquarians unearthed relics adorned with familiar patterns. Certain aristocratic families reintroduced crests that had not been used in centuries. In France, Germany, and even parts of the British Isles, the same shapes resurfaced like echoes beneath layers of newer history, as though something dormant was stirring in the collective imagination. Many of these symbols also appeared in secret societies, whose influence in Enlightenment and Revolutionary periods was far greater than official accounts reveal. Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and other esoteric groups referenced ancient kingship traditions that seemed to reach beyond biblical lore into something far older. Hidden in their manuscripts are depictions of sea-born kings, star-born lineages, and references to a sleeping bloodline destined to awaken. These were not explicit mentions of the Merovingians, but the imagery aligned so closely that later scholars traced unmistakable parallels. During this period, one text in particular began to circulate quietly among esoteric circles. An enigmatic manuscript known by various names, the most common being the Codex of the Dawn Kings. Though its origins remain debated, the manuscript describes a lineage of rulers who carried knowledge from a drowned Western land to early Europe. Their descendants, according to the text, became guardians of sacred wisdom until the world reached a new turning point. While the Codex never uses historical names, its descriptions of hair, customs, symbols, and territories mirror what is known of early Merovingian kings. Some believe this codex inspired a wave of 19th century interest in ancient dynasties and their possible survival. At the same time, archaeological discoveries across Europe revealed artifacts that blurred the line between myth and history. Burial sites once attributed to anonymous chieftains contained objects with unmistakable Merovingian patterns: spiral rings, star-shaped plaques, and amulets bearing symbols linked to sea and light. Some of these artifacts were dated far earlier than the Merovingian era, suggesting that the dynasty may have inherited symbols from an older culture rather than creating them. This fueled theories that the Merovingians were part of a lineage stretching back to the Bronze Age or earlier, perhaps even connected to a civilization lost to time. The 20th century added yet another layer of intrigue. As global conflict reshaped borders and ideologies, intelligence agencies and occultist factions within certain political movements developed an interest in ancient bloodlines. Rumors circulated of groups attempting to trace or exploit lineages believed to carry mystical or symbolic power. During World War II, both Allied and Axis groups reportedly searched for relics and genealogical documents tied to early European dynasties. Some of these records vanished during the war, lost in fires, bombings, or deliberate removal. Their disappearance sparked speculation that they were taken by individuals or organizations seeking to control or suppress the legacy they represented. The post-war era, marked by the rise of academic archaeology and anthropology, shifted attention from symbols to genetics. Though genetic science was still in its infancy, early studies attempted to map the movement of ancient peoples across Europe. Some patterns seemed to align with territories once ruled by the Merovingians, leading researchers to reconsider earlier assumptions about migrations and ethnic origins. Though these discoveries were not definitive, they hinted at a continuity between ancient European tribes, lost civilizations, and medieval dynasties. While mainstream scholarship focused on empirical data, another movement was gaining traction in the shadows, one that blended mythology, alternative history, and esoteric interpretation. Writers, mystics, and independent researchers began tracing connections between the Merovingians, Atlantis, and a broader network of ancient cultures believed to share a common root. These theories suggested that the Merovingians had preserved fragments of a much older tradition, inherited from priest-kings or star-worshipping tribes who carried knowledge from a cataclysmic event in the distant past. By the late 20th century, popular culture absorbed these ideas. Books, documentaries, and secret society narratives began referencing hidden bloodlines, sacred genealogies, and dynasties supposedly linked to pre-flood civilizations. Some of these works were sensationalized. Others, however, drew from legitimate historical anomalies, symbols that reappeared without explanation, genealogies that abruptly diverged, relics that vanished right as interest grew. The idea of a surviving ancient lineage moved from obscure archives into the public imagination. Yet beneath the sensationalism lies a quieter truth. Across centuries of upheaval, certain symbols and traditions persisted with an almost deliberate consistency. They survived wars, revolutions, religious shifts, and the collapse of empires. They appeared in places miles apart, in the designs of architects, the rituals of societies, the crests of noble families, and the insignias of leaders who claimed no connection to the ancient kings, yet displayed their signs nonetheless. To many historians, this is merely the cyclical nature of symbolism, a pattern resurfacing across time. But to others, these reappearances are threads in a much larger tapestry, one that suggests the legacy of ancient rulers continues to influence the modern world in ways not fully recognized or understood. Whether through blood, memory, or the quiet power of symbols, the echoes of an ancient dynasty, perhaps one with roots extending toward Atlantis itself, still resonate beneath the surface of history. As the threads of history converge toward the present day, the echoes of vanished kings and forgotten civilizations seem to gather into a single, lingering question, one that hovers at the edge of both scholarship and myth. Could the remnants of an ancient lineage, one possibly rooted in a world older than recorded time, still exist quietly beneath the surface of the modern era? And if so, what would it mean for our understanding of the past, the present, and the hidden architecture of power that shapes both? It is here, in this liminal space between speculation and revelation, that the story of the Merovingians and their possible Atlantean heritage reaches its most profound point of tension. The modern world, for all its technology and logic, remains deeply fascinated by origins. In times of uncertainty, wars, political shifts, global crises, people instinctively look backward, searching for patterns that might explain the currents of the present. In this environment, old symbols long thought irrelevant have resurfaced in unexpected places, on the logos of international institutions, in architectural motifs of newly built governmental structures, and even in the insignias used by private organizations whose origins remain opaque. The bees, the spirals, the 7-rayed or 8-rayed stars, emblems once associated with early Frankish kings, appear with uncanny regularity, as though quietly signaling a lineage preparing to be acknowledged once more. Some of the most intriguing manifestations of these symbols come from regions with deep historical ties to the Merovingians. In southern France, in towns shaped by ancient tribal boundaries, local legends speak of families who carry the mark of the old kings, not through wealth or title, but through subtle traits, an unusual emblem in their family crest, a ritual preserved without explanation, or genealogical records that stretch far beyond the medieval norm. These families rarely claim direct descent. Instead, they hold an inherited reverence for something they cannot entirely describe, but feel bound to protect. Their oral histories contain references to the king in the mountains, the child who never died, or the blood that sleeps until the world is ready again. Meanwhile, in academic circles, a quiet shift has begun. Despite the dominance of conventional narratives, a growing number of researchers have started re-examining evidence dismissed for centuries. myths of Western lands destroyed in a great flood, genetic anomalies in populations linked to early Frankish tribes, and artifacts whose symbolism does not align with their archaeological context. Some researchers propose that the earliest inhabitants of certain European regions were not merely tribal groups evolving in isolation, but survivors of an older civilization scattered by catastrophe. And if survivors existed, their knowledge, rituals, and lineage could easily have blended into later dynasties, particularly those, like the Merovingians, who claimed descent from sea-born or star-connected ancestors. Modern genetic mapping adds another layer of intrigue. Although no study has yet identified a definitive royal lineage marker, certain haplogroups show surprising continuity across regions associated with the earliest Merovingian settlements. These patterns do not prove a hidden dynasty, but they raise questions. Why do some isolated families carry markers that appear ancient, rare, and geographically concentrated? Why do these markers align so closely with areas steeped in legends of hidden heirs and dormant bloodlines? Some scientists caution against overinterpretation. Others argue that the data, while incomplete, points toward a story more complex than the simplified migrations outlined in textbooks. In parallel with the scientific exploration, another phenomenon has emerged: a resurgence of esoteric interest in ancient bloodlines. Groups once relegated to the fringes now hold growing libraries of research, connecting myths of Atlantis with European dynastic histories. These groups, whether serious scholars or speculative enthusiasts, often reference a common theme: the existence of a hidden lineage that carries wisdom from a pre-flood world. They point to recurring patterns across ancient cultures: the reverence for sea-born kings, the myths of luminous ancestors, and the symbols of celestial descent. When these threads are woven together, the narrative they produce aligns eerily with the legends surrounding the Merovingians. But perhaps the most compelling aspect of the modern landscape is not the symbols or the genetics or the secret of organizations. It is the intuition, felt by many, that history, as we know it, is incomplete. That the rise and fall of civilizations follows cycles shaped by forces older and more intricate than political ambition alone. And within this broader view, the idea of a lineage surviving in silence does not seem improbable. It seems almost inevitable. Cultures throughout the world preserved their sacred lines. The priest-kings of Egypt, the celestial emperors of China, the fire-born dynasties of ancient Persia. Why would Europe be the exception? There are researchers who believe the Merovingian legacy continues not as a political claim to thrones, but as a thread of identity woven through the cultural fabric of Europe. They argue that the true significance of the lineage is not power over nations, but the preservation of knowledge of cycles, of ancient catastrophes, of star patterns and earth changes, of the rise and decline of civilizations. Knowledge that may have originated in a land lost to time, passed down through tribes, kings, monks, and secret guardians. This idea becomes even more striking when considered beside global patterns. Modern satellite mapping of ancient shorelines suggests that before the end of the last ice age, many coastal civilizations were submerged. If an advanced culture existed during that time, one that left echoes in myths across the world, its survivors would have fled inland, carrying their traditions and symbols. Europe, with its river valleys, protected highlands, and ancient cave sites, would have been a natural destination. And if a group of these survivors eventually merged with early European tribes, their legacy could easily have surfaced in dynasties like the Merovingians, dynasties that claimed descent from luminous beings, sea kings, or those who came from the dawn. Which brings the narrative to the present moment. A world undergoing rapid transformation, where old borders dissolve, ancient symbols return, and forgotten lineages inch back into public consciousness. Whether through coincidence, synchronicity, or deliberate intention, the same motifs that marked the earliest Merovingian kings. Those kings linked in legend to survivors of Atlantis are once again visible. The question lingering above all of this is not simply whether the lineage survived, but why it mattered enough to be guarded, hidden, suppressed, and rediscovered across so many centuries. What truth lies buried beneath the myths of sea-born kings, the guardianship of monastic orders, and the reappearance of ancient symbols in modern institutions? And if that truth points toward a civilization older than memory, preserved through bloodline or tradition, then perhaps the greatest revelation is not that the Merovingians survived, but that they were never merely kings of early France. They may have been the final inheritors of a legacy far older, stretching back to a world whose ruins lie beneath the ocean, waiting for history to catch up.